The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and all that time, they had never seen anything quite so funny as Humanity Ambassador Valith of the Cathari stood before the High Assembly, her crystalline body shimmering with barely contained amusement as she presented the findings of the scout fleet that had discovered Earth. "They call themselves humans," she announced, and a ripple of laughter spread through the vast chamber where 847 species had gathered to witness this moment. The holographic display behind her showed images of Earth, a small blue world, orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. "They are made of meat," Valith continued. "They live for less than 100 years, and they have no psionics, no natural shields, no hive coordination, and no ability to communicate through thought." The laughter grew louder. High Commander Sirithos of the Velith Dominion leaned forward in his seat, his four eyes blinking in disbelief as he watched footage of human cities and human technology. "They reach space using combustion," he said, and his voice dripped with contempt. "They literally sit on top of explosions to leave their planet." "It gets better," Valith said. "They wage wars against each other, and not for resources or territory, but for ideas and beliefs and imaginary lines they draw on maps." The assembly erupted into genuine laughter now, the kind that echoed through the chamber and made the walls vibrate with shared amusement. The Sinith Collective, a hive mind species that spoke with one voice through 1,000 bodies, offered their assessment next. "They are fragile," the collective said. "A fall from moderate height can kill them. An exposure to vacuum will end them in minutes. And they require constant intake of organic matter and liquid to survive. They sleep for 1/3 of their lives," added the representative of the Marathi, an energy-based species that had not known physical form for 6,000 years. "They simply shut down and become helpless for hours at a time." Ambassador Valith raised a crystalline hand to quiet the chamber. "The question before this assembly is simple," she said. "What do we do with them?" The debate lasted less than an hour. Humanity was granted protected primitive status, which was the Concord's polite way of saying they were too weak to be taken seriously and too amusing to be destroyed. Human diplomats were assigned minders who would watch over them and make sure they did not hurt themselves or others. Human ships were forbidden from carrying weapons of any kind, and human colonies were restricted to 3 barren moons that no proper civilization wanted. The human ambassador, a woman named Sarah Chun, accepted these terms with a smile and a bow. "We are grateful for the protection of the Concord," she said, and her voice was soft and humble. "We have so much to learn from the great civilizations of the galaxy." The assembly found her charming in the way one might find a clever pet charming over the next 30 years. Humanity proved to be the most curious species the Concord had ever encountered. They asked questions about everything, about technology and history and biology and physics and culture, and art and war. They requested cultural exchanges and educational partnerships and scientific collaborations. They sent students to every world that would have them and invited teachers from across the galaxy to visit Earth. The Concord found this endearing. The Velith Dominion allowed humans to study their shipyards, because what harm could primitives do with knowledge they could never use? The Cathari shared their crystalline technology, because humans lacked the ability to interface with it. Anyway, Sinith Collective permitted human scientists to observe their hive networks, because the very concept of individuality made humans incapable of understanding what they saw. Even the secretive Marathi allowed human researchers to study their energy matrices, because beings made of meat could never transcend their physical forms. Humanity smiled and nodded and thanked them for every scrap of knowledge. They never complained when Concord ships violated their space. They never protested when their people were taken for a study by curious alien scientists. They never objected when their colonies were taxed at rates that would have sparked rebellion in any other species. They simply paid and smiled and asked more questions. High Commander Sirithos was the first to feel a flicker of unease. Though he dismissed it quickly, he noticed that human research vessels seemed to be everywhere at once, mapping every system and cataloging every world. He noticed that human students asked very specific questions about fleet deployments and defensive capabilities and resource extraction. He noticed that the gratitude payments humanity made to the Concord were funding construction projects on their 3 moons, projects that seemed far too large for agricultural facilities. But when he raised these concerns to the assembly, Ambassador Valith laughed and waved them away. "They are humans," she said. "They are weak and fragile and short-lived, and they have no way to threaten us even if they wanted to." The assembly agreed, and Sirithos let the matter drop. He did not know about the 4th moon. No one in the Concord knew about the 4th moon, because humanity had erased it from every star chart and sensor network in the galaxy. Deep inside that hidden moon, Admiral Chen Wei, granddaughter of the first human ambassador, addressed the United Terran Council. 30 years, she said. 30 years of smiling while they laughed at us, and 30 years of bowing while they took our people for experiments, and 30 years of learning everything they thought we were too stupid to understand. She gestured to the holographic display behind her, which showed 12,000 warships hidden in hollowed-out asteroids across the galaxy. "They gave us protected primitive status," she continued. "They treated us like pets and children and amusing diversions, and they never once stopped to wonder why we accepted it all without complaint." The council members nodded in grim satisfaction. "The fleet is ready," Admiral Chen Wei said. "And now the galaxy will learn what humanity does to those who underestimate us on the Concord capital world." Ambassador Valith prepared for another day of routine meetings. Unaware that the species she had dismissed as harmless was about to change the galaxy forever. She had laughed at humans for 30 years. She would not be laughing much longer. The message arrived on Vareth Prime during the morning cycle, when the twin suns cast long shadows across the gleaming towers of the Velith capital. City Governor Crethan read it 3 times before he believed what he was seeing. "This is a formal request from the United Terran government," the message said. "We demand the immediate release of the 47 human prisoners currently held in your research facilities. And we demand a formal apology for the deaths of the 12 humans who did not survive your experiments. And we demand compensation for their families." The governor laughed so hard that his 4 eyes watered and his secondary lungs ached. Forwarded the message to High Commander Sirithos with a note that said, "The pets have learned to bark." Sirithos did not laugh. Something about the message bothered him. Something in the precise language and the formal structure and the complete lack of pleading or desperation. He pulled up the files on the Vareth Prime research facility and discovered that yes, the Velith had been conducting experiments on captured humans for the past 15 years. The experiments were not pleasant. Human bodies had been dissected to understand their strange biology, and human minds had been probed to map their primitive neural networks, and human pain responses had been tested to determine their tolerance thresholds. 47 humans remained alive in the facility. Though the word alive was generous for some of them, Sarathos considered the situation carefully. The humans had no military, no weapons, and no way to enforce their demands. But something in his gut told him to take this seriously anyway. Sent a recommendation to Governor Crethan, suggesting that perhaps releasing the prisoners might be wise, if only to avoid any diplomatic complications. The governor ignored him. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, a single human ship appeared at the edge of the Vareth system. It was small and unarmed and completely unremarkable. and the Velith defense fleet tracked it with casual interest as it approached the planet. The ship stopped at a safe distance and broadcast a message on all frequencies. The message was 14 seconds long. It showed the human flag, a blue circle on a white background, representing Earth as seen from space. It played the human anthem, a simple melody that the Velith found primitive and unimpressive, and it displayed one sentence in perfect Velith script. We asked nicely. Then the ship turned and left. The system governor Crethan ordered the defense fleet to destroy it, but the ship was already gone, jumping to faster than light speed before the first weapon could fire. Pathetic, the governor said. They send one tiny ship to threaten us, and then they run away like the cowards they are. He returned to his duties and thought nothing more of it. 12 hours later, the first reports began coming in. People were collapsing in the streets of the capital city, falling where they stood with no warning and no explanation. The hospitals filled within minutes. And then the hospitals themselves went silent as the doctors and nurses collapsed alongside their patients. Governor Crethan watched the reports from his office in the government tower, his 4 eyes wide with growing horror. What is happening? He demanded. What is killing them? No one could answer him. The death spread outward from the capital like a wave, washing over cities and towns and villages and farms. Animals died alongside people, and plants withered in their fields, and even the bacteria in the soil stopped moving within 6 hours. Every living thing on Verith Prime was dead. The last transmission from the planet was Governor Crethan screaming into his communicator, begging for help that would never come, and then there was only silence. High Commander Sirithos received the news aboard his flagship, and for the first time in his 300 years of life, he felt genuine fear. He ordered an immediate investigation and assembled the largest fleet the Concord had ever deployed. 400 warships arrived at Verith Prime 3 days later. Their crews prepared for battle against some unknown enemy. They found no enemy. They found a graveyard. The city stood intact, with their towers reaching toward the sky and their streets lined with vehicles that had stopped mid-journey. Infrastructure was untouched, with power plants still running and water systems still flowing and communication networks still broadcasting static, but there was no life. 3.2 billion Velith had lived on Verith Prime, and now every single one of them was dead. The investigation teams wore sealed suits as they moved through the silent cities, collecting samples and recording data and trying to understand what had happened. The autopsies revealed the cause of death, a bioweapon unlike anything the Concord had ever seen. It was a virus engineered with precision that should have been impossible, designed to target non-human cellular structures while leaving everything else untouched. It had spread through the atmosphere in hours, invisible to every scanner and filter the Velith possessed. It had been dormant at first, giving it time to reach every corner of the planet before activating all at once, and it had been specifically designed to kill Velith and nothing. Elsa Sarithos read the report with shaking hands. This is human work, he said. This is what they were doing while we laughed at them, and this is what they learned while we taught them our secrets. The assembly convened an emergency session, and for the first time in 12,000 years, there was no laughter in the chamber. Ambassador Valith demanded to know how this had happened, and she demanded to know who was responsible, and she demanded immediate retaliation against the human colonies. With respect, Sirithos said, I recommend caution. Caution, Velith shouted. They murdered 3 billion Velith. And you recommend caution. They murdered 3 billion Velith with a weapon we cannot detect and cannot stop and cannot understand. Sirithos replied, and they did it with one ship and one broadcast and no apparent effort at all. The chamber fell silent. We do not know what else they have. Sirithos continued. We do not know where they are hiding, and we do not know what they will do if we strike blindly. And I recommend we learn these things before we act, Ambassador. Valith dismissed his concerns with a wave of her crystalline hand. They are humans, she said. They got lucky once. But they cannot stand against the full might of the Concord. She ordered the combined fleet to assemble 800,000 warships from every member species, the largest military force the galaxy had ever seen. They would go to the human colonies, and they would destroy them. And they would go to Earth, and they would burn it. And they would end this threat forever. Serathos obeyed his orders, but as his fleet prepared to jump, he could not shake the feeling that they were making a terrible mistake. He was right. The combined fleet arrived at the human colonies with enough firepower to crack a planet in half. Hi. Commander Serathos stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display as 800,000 warships took position around the 3 moons humanity had been given. All weapons charged. His tactical officer reported, "We are ready to fire on your command." Serathos hesitated. The moons looked wrong. The orbital stations that had once surrounded them were gone, and the surface structures that had housed millions of humans were dark and empty. And there was no sign of the population that should have been there. "Scan for life signs," he ordered. "Scanning," the officer replied. And then her voice turned confused. "Commander, I am detecting no life signs on any of the 3 moons, and the stations are gone. And the colonies appear to be completely abandoned." Serathos felt ice form in his stomach. "Where did they go?" he demanded. 8 million humans lived on these moons. So where did they go? No one can answer him. The fleet spread out, searching every asteroid and every debris field and every dark corner of the system. But there was nothing to find. The humans had simply vanished then. The automated beacon activated. It floated in the empty space where the largest human station had once been, and it broadcast a single message on all frequencies. "We are not where you expected." The message said in perfect Concord standard, "We are where you least want us to be." Serathos understood immediately. "Get me a channel to the Kethari homeworld," he shouted. Now, the communication officer worked frantically at her console, but the connection would not go through. "I cannot reach them," she said. "The homeworld is not responding, and the relay stations are silent, and there is nothing coming from the entire system." Serathos closed his 4 eyes and felt despair wash over him. The Kethari homeworld had 12 billion inhabitants. It had been the center of Concord civilization for 8,000 years, and now it was silent. The fleet raced back to Kethari Prime at maximum speed, pushing their engines beyond safe limits in a desperate attempt to save what they could. They arrived too late. Crystalline cities of the Kethari were intact, their beautiful spires catching the light of the system's 3 suns and casting rainbows across the empty streets. The infrastructure was functional, and the automated systems were running, and the planetary defense grid was still active, but every Kethari was dead. The same weapon had been used, adapted to target crystalline biology instead of Velith flesh. It had spread through the very light that the Kethari used to communicate, traveling from crystal to crystal until the entire population had been infected. And just like on Verith Prime, a single human ship had been detected in the system hours before the dying. Began Ambassador Valith was among the dead. Her crystalline form was found in her private chambers, frozen in a position that suggested she had been reaching for something when the ending came. The combined fleet had just witnessed the death of 2 founding species of the Galactic Concord, and they had been powerless to stop it. The assembly fractured within days. The Marathi withdrew behind their energy barriers and refused all communication. Sinith Collective began preparing their world cracker weapons, technology so dangerous it had been banned for 6,000 years. A dozen smaller species simply surrendered, broadcasting messages of submission to any human ship that might be listening. Fear spread faster than the bioweapon had. For 12,000 years, The Concorde had been the supreme power in the galaxy. They had conquered every challenge, defeated every enemy, and absorbed every threat into their growing civilization. Now they were being hunted by a species they had dismissed as pets. Admiral Chun Wei released humanity's terms on the anniversary of Vareth Prime's death. "We seek peace," the message said. "We have never wanted war, and we have never attacked anyone who did not attack us first. But we will not be slaves, and we will not be specimens, and we will not be laughed at ever again." The terms were simple. Humanity demanded full recognition as a sovereign power with all the rights and protections that status provided. Humanity demanded reparations for the 30 years of exploitation and experimentation they had endured. Humanity demanded the return of every human specimen held in every research facility across Concorde space. Humanity demanded permanent seats on the High Assembly, with voting rights equal to any other species, and humanity demanded a formal apology from every member of the Concorde. The surviving assembly members debated for 3 days. Some wanted to accept immediately, terrified of what humanity would do if they refused. Others wanted to fight, convinced that the Concorde's superior numbers would eventually overwhelm human defenses. The Sinith Collective ended the debate. "We will not negotiate with primitives," the collective announced through their 1,000 voices. "We will not bow to meat creatures who should be grateful we allowed them to exist." They deployed their world cracker fleet without warning, jumping directly to the Sol system with enough firepower to shatter Earth itself. The collective expected to find humanity defenseless. They expected to end the war with a single overwhelming strike. They expected to teach the galaxy that the old order would not fall so easily. They were wrong. The world cracker fleet, 17 dreadnoughts, and 200 support vessels carrying weapons that violated every treaty the Concorde had ever signed, arrived in Earth orbit to find something impossible waiting. For them, a barrier of shimmering energy surrounded the human homeworld, stretching from pole to pole and pulsing with frequencies that made no sense. The Sinith commanders analyzed it for less than a minute before opening fire. Every weapon in the fleet fired at once. Enough destructive power to reduce a continent to ash. The barrier absorbed it all, and then the barrier moved it, expanded outward like a living thing. A wave of distorted space-time that folded reality in on itself. The Sinith dreadnoughts tried to retreat, but they were too slow. The barrier touched the first ship, and the ship simply ceased to exist, compressed into a point of infinite density that flashed once and vanished one by one. The world cracker fleet died. 1.2 million Siniths were gone in 7 seconds. The barrier returned to its original position around Earth, as calm and peaceful as if nothing had happened. A single human transmission followed. "You were warned," it said. 3 more species tested humanity in the weeks that followed. The Velith survivors assembled a revenge fleet and attacked the human position at Alpha Centauri. They found a minefield that stretched across 3 light years, seeded with weapons that could think and hunt and kill without mercy. The Marathi emerged from their energy barriers and attempted to infiltrate human networks. Using their non-physical forms, they discovered that humans had developed countermeasures, devices that could disrupt energy-based life forms and trap them in eternal agony. A coalition of smaller species pooled their resources and launched a coordinated assault on what they believed was a hidden human base. The base was a trap, and the coalition fleet was captured intact, their crews taken prisoner and held in conditions far better than any human had experienced in Concorde labs. One by one, the aggressors fell silent, and slowly, the galaxy began to understand what they faced. Humanity had spent 30 years learning every secret the Concorde possessed. They had studied every technology, mapped every weakness, and prepared countermeasures for every threat. They had smiled while being mocked because they were patient. They had bowed while being exploited because they were planning, and now they were ready to claim their place among the stars, whether the galaxy wanted them to or not. The galaxy had never known fear like this for 12,000 years. The species of the Concord had believed themselves the masters of creation, the rightful rulers of the stars, the most advanced civilizations to ever exist. Now they huddled behind their defenses and waited for death to come. High Commander Sirithos was one of the few leaders who still tried to understand rather than simply react. He spent long hours studying everything the Concord knew about humanity, every scrap of data from 30 years of observation and interaction. What he found terrified him more than any weapon. They remember everything, he told the Emergency Council of Surviving Species. Every insult and every humiliation and every cruelty we inflicted on them. They wrote it down and they taught it to their children, and they never forgot. The Council listened in silence. When we gave them protected primitive status, they smiled and accepted it, Sirithos continued. When we restricted their colonies to worthless moons, they thanked us for our generosity, and when we took their people for experiments, they filed polite complaints and waited for responses that never came. He pulled up a holographic display showing the network of human activity across Concord space over the past 3 decades. While we laughed at them, they were learning, he said. Every question they asked had purpose, and every cultural exchange was reconnaissance, and every educational partnership was espionage. The display showed human research vessels moving through Concord territory, mapping military installations and defensive networks and resource extraction facilities. It showed human students in Concord universities studying technologies their teachers assumed they could never use. It showed human diplomats attending Concord functions, listening and watching and remembering everything. We gave them everything they needed to destroy us, Sirithos said. We gave it to them freely because we were too arrogant to imagine they could ever be a threat. The Velith representative, one of the few survivors from Verith Prime who had been off-world when the bioweapon struck, slammed his fist on the table. Then we must find their weakness, he shouted. Every species has a weakness, so what is theirs? Sirithos shook his head slowly. That is the problem, he said. We always saw their weaknesses as proof of their inferiority, but we never understood what those weaknesses truly meant. He changed the display to show the biology of a human being, the fragile meat body that the Concord had found so amusing. They are fragile, Sirithos said. A simple fall can kill them, and disease can destroy them, and their own environment tries to murder them constantly. The council nodded impatiently, waiting for him to make his point. Do you understand what that means? Sirithos asked. It means they evolved on a death world, a planet where survival was never guaranteed, and every day was a battle against extinction. He highlighted the human brain, showing its complex neural pathways and its capacity for pattern recognition and planning. They developed intelligence, not because it was elegant, but because without it they would have died, he continued. They learned to make tools because their bodies were too weak to fight, and they learned to cooperate because alone they were prey, and they learned to plan because the future was always trying to kill them. The council was beginning to understand, and the understanding brought no comfort. We laughed at them for fighting among themselves, Sirithos said. But those wars taught them things we never learned, because we have been too powerful to face real challenges for thousands of years. He showed historical footage of human conflicts, brutal and devastating and horrifying in their intensity. They learned to never give up, because surrender meant death, he said. They learned to adapt, because the enemy who stayed the same was destroyed, and they learned to hold grudges, because forgetting a threat meant that threat would return. He turned off the display and faced the council directly. "We are not fighting primitives," Sirithos said. "We are fighting survivors. And they have been surviving against impossible odds for their entire existence as a species." The Marathi representative flickered with agitation. "What do you suggest we do?" she asked. "We cannot surrender to them, and we cannot defeat them. So what options remain?" Sirithos took a deep breath. "We negotiate," he said. "We accept their terms, and we give them what they ask for, and we hope that they are willing to show us mercy we never showed them." The council erupted in outrage. "Surrender to meat creatures," the Veloth representative shouted. "Accept terms from primitives who should be thanking us for allowing them to exist. Those primitives killed 15 billion of us in less than a month." Sirithos replied, "Those primitives have weapons we cannot understand, and defenses we cannot breach, and a will to fight that we cannot break." He stood and faced the council with all the authority his rank provided. "We have two choices," he said. "We can accept their terms and survive with our civilizations intact, but our pride wounded. Or we can continue fighting and watch them destroy us one world at a time." The debate raged for hours. Pride warred with survival, and arrogance struggled against reality. And slowly the council began to fracture. Some species sided with Sirithos, recognizing that negotiation was the only path forward. Others refused to accept that humanity could be anything more than lucky. Primitives who had achieved a few temporary victories, and still others simply stopped responding, their homeworlds going silent as humanity continued its campaign of precise and devastating retribution. The final count came 3 weeks later of the 847 species that had made up the Galactic Concord. 412 had been destroyed or had surrendered unconditionally. 203 had agreed to negotiate under the terms humanity had offered. The remaining 232 were still fighting, still convinced that they could win if they just held on long enough. Admiral Chen Wei addressed those remaining holdouts in a broadcast that reached every corner of the galaxy. "We do not want your destruction," she said. "We never wanted war at all, but we will not stop until we are free." Her face was calm and her voice was steady, showing none of the rage or triumph that the aliens expected. "Every world that has fallen was given a choice," she continued. "We sent warnings, and we sent ultimatums, and we gave you every opportunity to choose peace. But you chose to laugh at us instead." She leaned forward, and her eyes held something ancient and cold and patient. "We are still offering that choice," she said. "Accept our terms and live, or refuse and join the others in silence." She paused to let the words sink in. "You have 1 week to decide." The 232 holdout species began sending their surrender messages within hours. All except one. The Vela survivors had formed a coalition of the most hardline elements from a dozen species, united by their hatred of humanity and the refusal to accept defeat. They had been building something in secret, a weapon of last resort that they believed would finally give them the power to win. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The Veloth coalition called their weapon the Godslayer. It had taken them 6 months to build in secret, hidden in the debris field of a dead system where no one would think to look. The weapon was massive, a ship the size of a small moon, powered by the cores of 3 captured stars and armed with technology that bent the laws of physics. Themselves it could crack planets and snuff out suns and tear holes in the fabric of reality, and the coalition was certain that nothing humanity possessed could stand against it. They were wrong. Admiral Chen Wei had known about the Godslayer since the 3rd week of its construction. Human infiltrators had mapped every system and cataloged every component and transmitted detailed reports back to Earth. When the weapon finally emerged from its hiding place, humanity was ready. The Coalition fleet jumped into the Sol system with the Godslayer at its center, surrounded by 5,000 escort vessels and crewed by the most fanatical warriors the remaining species could muster. They expected to find Earth defended by the strange barrier that had destroyed the Synth world crackers. Instead, they found a single human ship waiting for them. The ship was small and unarmed and completely alone. Floating in the darkness between Earth and Mars, Admiral Chen Wei appeared on their screens. Her face as calm as it had always been. "I'm offering you one final chance," she said. "Turn back now and you will be allowed to live. But continue forward and you will die." The Coalition commander, a Velith general named Krathos, who had lost his entire family on Varith Prime, laughed at her. "One ship," he said. "You send one ship against the Godslayer, and you expect us to be afraid." "I expect you to be intelligent," Chen Wei replied. "But I've learned not to count on that from the Concord." Krathos ended the transmission and ordered the fleet to advance. The Godslayer powered up its main weapon, a beam of concentrated destruction that could vaporize anything in its path. The targeting systems locked onto Earth, and the countdown began. Chen Wei's ship did not move. "Fire!" Krathos commanded. The Godslayer released its power, a column of annihilation that streaked toward the human homeworld with the force of a dying star. It never reached its target. The beam struck something invisible in the space between the fleets, something that absorbed the energy and redirected it and turned it back on its source. The Godslayer died in an instant, consumed by its own weapon, and the 5,000 escort vessels found themselves surrounded by human ships that had not been there a moment before. Battle lasted 12 minutes when it was over. The Coalition fleet was gone, and General Kratos was a prisoner on Admiral Chen Wei's ship. She visited him in his cell, standing on the other side of the energy barrier that kept him contained. "How?" he demanded. "How did you know? And how were you ready? And how did you defeat us so easily?" Chen Wei studied him for a long moment before answering. "You spent 6 months building your weapon in what you thought was secret," she said. "We spent 30 years building an empire you never knew existed." She pulled up a holographic display showing the true extent of human territory. Not 3 barren moons, but thousands of worlds spread across the galaxy, hidden in plain sight behind false readings and manufactured data. "Every time you laughed at us, we were learning," she said. "Every time you dismissed us as primitives, we were growing stronger. And every time you ignored our warnings, we were preparing for this moment." Krathos stared at the display in disbelief. "You could have conquered us at any time," he said. "You had the power all along, so why did you wait?" "Because we wanted you to choose," Chen Wei replied. "We gave you every opportunity to treat us as equals, and you refused. And we gave you every chance to make peace, and you laughed." She leaned closer to the barrier. "We did not want to destroy you," she said. "But we are not prey, and we will not be victims. And we will not be laughed at by those who think strength is the only measure of worth." The Treaty of Sol was signed 3 days later on the deck of the UTS Remembrance, the largest human warship ever constructed. Every surviving species sent representatives, and they stood in halls lined with artifacts from the civilizations that had chosen to fight instead of negotiate. The terms were exactly what humanity had offered from the beginning, no more, no less. The Galactic Concord would dissolve, and a new galactic union would rise in its place with humanity as founding members and permanent arbiters of disputes. All weapons of mass extinction would be surrendered to human oversight, ensuring that no species could ever again threaten to destroy entire worlds, and every member of the Union would acknowledge humanity as equals, with all the rights and protections that status provided. High Commander Sirathos signed on behalf of the Velith remnant, his 4 eyes filled with exhaustion and something that might have been respect. "You could have destroyed us completely," he said to Admiral Chen Wei. You had the power to wipe us from existence. So why didn't you? Chen Wei considered the question carefully. Because that is not who we are, she said. We wanted justice, not genocide, and we wanted recognition, not revenge. She gestured at the gathered representatives. The survivors of species that had spent 30 years mocking and exploiting humanity. You underestimated us because we were fragile and short-lived and fought among ourselves, she said. But those things made us who we are, and they made us strong in ways you could not understand. She turned to face the viewing port, looking out at the stars that humanity had finally claimed as their own. We are survivors, she said. We have always been survivors. And the universe tried to kill us for 1,000,000 years before we ever reached space. Cerithos moved to stand beside her, and for the first time, he looked at a human, not with contempt or fear, but with something approaching understanding. What will you do now? He asked. You have won everything you fought for. So, what comes next? Chen Wei smiled. The same gentle smile that her grandmother had worn when she accepted protected primitive status all those years ago. Now we build something better, she said. A galaxy where no species is dismissed as primitive, and no people are taken for experiments. And no one is laughed at for being different. She turned to face him directly. We learned from you, she said. We learned technology and science and the secrets of the stars. But we also learned what kind of civilization we did not want to become. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence for all those who had died, human and alien alike. Then the representatives returned to their ships and their worlds, carrying with them the knowledge that the galaxy had changed forever. The species that had once laughed at humanity would spend generations trying to understand how they had been so wrong. They would study human history and human culture and human psychology, searching for the secret that had allowed such a fragile species to conquer the stars. And slowly, over centuries, they would begin to understand humans were not strong despite their weaknesses. They were strong because of them. Every challenge they faced had taught them something, and every enemy they fought had made them harder to kill. And every moment of their existence had been a lesson in survival. The galaxy had laughed at them for being fragile and short-lived and divided. The galaxy had never stopped to ask the only question that mattered: if humans were so weak, how had they survived long enough to reach the stars in the first place? The answer was written in their history and their biology and their unbreakable will. They were survivors, and survivors do not give up, they do not forget, and they do not lose.